United Launch Alliance has finally let their Vulcan Centaur take off. 5 years late, but they have successfully flown with a new disposable rocket in the year 2024, but they were successful. And as cool and great as a new rocket is, its use is just as serious. That's why a superficial view is not enough for me today. Not everything is always fun and games. There's a lot of money and even more politics involved. Labor market, industry, military, security, and economic policy, just to name a few. Often it's about military missions, or it's about communication, Earth observation, or building constellations. As the icing on the cake, the ULA is now for sale, and there are even some interested parties. The first Vulcan flight was about shooting the approximately 1.3-ton Peregrine lander from Astrobotic to the South Pole of the Moon. By the way, the lander did not make it to the Moon, but we will get to that in detail a little later. What I'm trying to say is that a rocket is rarely launched just to amuse someone. He's not listening to him, he was just talking. As I said, rarely. It doesn't really get much more serious than the applications I just mentioned. Perhaps that's also why the chief executive officer of ULA blocks anyone who criticizes his misleading comments and graphics on Tinny, including myself. If the generals who distribute the emissions to the companies would see that the guy is being exposed by YouTubers on social platforms, it would probably be a disgrace for him. Don't worry, if what I just said confuses you, you're not alone in that. That's the reason for this video. I'm using the maiden flight of the Vulcan Centaur from United Launch Alliance, or ULA for short, as an opportunity to give you a more detailed overview of who they are and what they do exactly. Because as so often, it's not quite what it seems. If you're not familiar, it's easy to assume that ULA is a rocket company that launches satellites into space. But that's not really the case. It's true that they launch rockets, but that's not their primary purpose. Primarily, ULA is a joint venture that was forced by the United States legislator from the aerospace departments of Boeing and Lockheed Martin in the year 2006. In other words, ULA is a political tool. It primarily secures jobs, thus votes for some United States politicians, and additionally satisfies the underlying lobby. Access to space almost loses its importance here. At the time, Boeing had the Delta II and Delta IV rockets on offer. Lockheed brought the Atlas V into the forced marriage. The offer of the two at the time was so expensive and unaffordable that even the American commercial satellites were launched by the European Ariane 5, the Russian Soyuz, and a few others. Just imagine what times they were when the Ariane 5 was the best commercial option. National Aeronautics and Space Administration was still using the space shuttle for its missions at that time. The offerings from Lockheed and Boeing were tailor-made for the so-called national security missions. So extremely expensive. So that the two wouldn't scrap their rockets, they were eventually forced into a merger. Because the United States of America did not want to lose the ability to shoot heavy payloads anywhere into the solar system under any circumstances. That's how ULA was created. This makes the Vulcan Centaur the first quasi-marital child of the ULA, but they didn't develop it just for fun or because they are so ambitious and motivated. When comrades Putin and his associates annexed Crimea in 2014, the United States military imposed some sanctions on Russia. This included rocket engines. And since the Atlas V uses the Russian RD-180 engines, ULA was now forced to bring something of their own to the market. This forced the retirement of the Atlas V, and the Delta IV Heavy forced its own end, because launching this rocket costs a fortune. Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, mentions around $300 million in his video, which would already be a very steep price. but Wikipedia states 350 million for regular customers. However, according to Wikipedia, the United States military also pays 440 million. Other sources talk about much more. Some even mention the price of $1 billion per Delta IV Heavy launch. And that's in addition to the $1 billion subsidy they receive. Even if they don't launch. And the Delta IV Heavy rarely launches twice a year. To be precise, never. In 2005, 2006, and 2015, it didn't launch at all. That's the way to live. Her 16th and final flight is scheduled for March 2024. Just a reminder to subscribe to Mars Chronicles and leave a thumbs up. Thank you. At this point, we're leaving out all the technical data of the Delta IV Heavy, as I've already covered this in a separate video with Aeneas. The video is linked below in the description. So you see, the Delta IV Heavy is more about job security than it is about the fulfillment of rocket launches. To be fair, it should also be said that until 10 years ago, there was no real commercial market for rockets. But this is a classic chicken and egg situation because everyone knew that it would be unaffordable to get into the business. That changed with SpaceX. By the way, SpaceX has been and is being fought against by ULA by all means. The primary weapon of ULA is lobbying. Otherwise, they don't really have much to counter them with. On the other hand, the Atlas V has been used a bit more often and still has some missions ahead of it. If I haven't miscounted, it has flown a total of 99 times so far. Before the merger, it had only taken off 6 times. Most of the launches were of an institutional nature. The last mission in October 2023 was a commercial launch. That's when the Atlas V brought 2 prototypes of the Amazon Internet mega constellation into orbit. This launch was actually supposed to be carried out by ABL, but for unclear reasons, this mission was then rebooked to the Atlas V. There should have already been several Starliner capsules shot to the International Space Station, but Starliner is still not ready for launch. You can of course find a video about the embarrassing and tragic history of Starliner in the description below. However, it is important to note that Starliner can also fly with the Vulcan, or could. It is designed to fly with the Falcon 9 or Delta IV Heavy. However, the rebooking will not take place because otherwise ULA would be left sitting on the Atlas rockets. In addition, the Vulcan is not certified for crew flights and probably will not be in the near future. Because such a certification is expensive, and neither Boeing, who build the capsule, nor ULA want to pay for it. They want to saddle the other partner with the costs. So it could well happen that Starliner will have to fly with the Falcon 9 in a few years. Until about 2030, about 17 more Atlas V rockets with 2 RD-180 engines each will launch. That's how many engines they still have in stock. However, the missions will no longer launch military payloads. That's what the Vulcans are for now. Wikipedia states that there is still one mission for the Space Force being launched on the Atlas V this year. However, I couldn't find any further details about it. 5IASat and Boeing are also launching again with the Atlas V. Kuiper has booked 8 more rockets and the remaining 6 are reserved for Starliner. Before we get to the details of the Vulcan, I'd like to talk a little bit about the politics behind the assignment of these missions. If you want to delve really deep into the subject, I've also produced a video on that. You can find that in the video description below. For now, it's enough to know that Kuiper is Amazon's internet mega constellation. So, the same family as Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. Blue Origin is currently operating the phallus carousel for the pleasure of wealthy people. But anyone who laughs at them is short-sighted and does not understand the business model. This works similarly to the Tesla strategy of first bringing a product to market for the wealthy, in order to both learn and test the technology and to establish a cash flow. They then made a pretty smart move. When the United States of America decided on sanctions against Russia, they promised ULA that they would supply them with an engine for their Vulcan. This is where the before four engines come into play. Blue Origin wanted to develop an engine for their New Glenn rocket anyway. And what's better than being able to sell the engine before using it yourself? Last but not least, the before 4 was also a reason for the 5 years delay. But this engine is the key to Vulcan's Centaur. It generates a win-win situation. Blue Origin has a guaranteed buyer for their engine, the development of which costs enormous sums, and ULA does not have to bear these costs themselves and receives a rocket engine made in the United States of America, which is a prerequisite for future national security missions. By the way, the New Glenn will use 7 before 4 engines in the first stage. Now back to the politics behind awarding the Kuiper mission. Last year, Kuiper acquired just under 100 launches for their constellation. Among the beneficiaries were the European Ariane 6, the Vulcan Centaur, and some launches of the New Glenn from its own sister company, Blue Origin. You might be wondering now why Kuiper is buying rockets from other companies when its own sister is about to bring the New Glenn to market. Well, each of the favored companies was hired for a different reason, but with ULA, the purchases have the following reasons. On one hand, ULA has lost some United States government contracts due to the delayed delivery of the before 4 engines. To make up for this, Blue Origin has bought up all the remaining Atlas V rockets because nobody else would have wanted them on the open market. On the other hand, Blue Origin is favoring itself when it buys a rocket that uses Blue Origin's before 4 engines for its operation. As I said, more about Kuiper in the video below in the description. Even before the Vulcan Maiden flight, there were rumors that ULA was for sale. And in addition to Severus Capital Management, another aerospace company is in the conversation which has ambitions to grab the institutional launches of the United States of America. The identity of that person is unknown. Scott Manley thinks it's Textron. That's a conglomerate that is anything but small. Now that the maiden flight of the Vulcan has been completed, more detailed information will likely be released in the coming weeks. We may also have to wait until after the SIR-T2 mission. The most prominent potential buyer, however, is Blue Origin. That would be fantastic in many ways for Jeff Bezos and his companies. With that, he would have at least one operational orbital carrier system for the next few years in one fell swoop, at least until the New Glenn goes online. This would also allow Blue Origin to remove or swallow one of their biggest competitors from the market at the same time. In addition, and this would probably be the biggest benefit of this takeover, Bezos would have the so-called national security missions of the United States military in his pocket. At this point, I would almost be surprised if Blue Origin would let the opportunity to acquire ULA pass by. Just the fact that ULA is for sale speaks volumes. Unfortunately, I don't have any background information, so I won't speculate further, but I would like you to think about it independently. Let's move on to the Vulcan Maiden flight. This mission is known as SIR-T1. It is the first of 2 certification flights. The second mission is also planned to take place this year and is supposed to bring a Dream Chaser into orbit for the first time. By the way, you can find a video about the Dream Chaser in the description below. These are necessary so that in the future, it can also launch the often mentioned national security missions. Frankly, this successful launch is a bigger success for Blue Origin than for ULA, because SIR-T1 makes the before 4 engine the first Metalox engine to successfully complete an orbital launch. This beats the Raptor from SpaceX, which is also powered by methane and oxygen, even though the upper stage is not a before 4, but 2 Hydrolox RL, 10 engines from Aerojet Rocketdyne. So the core elements of the rocket were not manufactured or developed by ULA itself. The solid rocket motors were also not, but we'll cover that shortly. Before we look at the payloads, let's take a closer look at the Vulcan and compare it with its competitors. A common misconception is that it competes with Starship or New Glenn just because it burns methane in the first stage. However, it's more probable that it will bid for the Ariane 5 or Ariane 6 contracts. But it also competes with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. To be precise, however, one must say that it would compete with these rockets if it could undercut them in price or surpass them in performance. But it does neither one nor the other. Nevertheless, it already has 70 missions on the books. This just shows how good ULA is at lobbying. 38 of them will carry Kuiper satellites. According to Wikipedia, 45 each. The remaining missions are like the National Security Global Positioning System and a few others. The Vulcan is made of an aluminum hull, is almost 62 meters high and 5.4 meters in diameter. So it's shorter and thicker than the Falcon 9, which is about 70 meters high and 3.7 meters in diameter. So it can be transported on the roads of the United States of America. The two BE-4 engines alone each deliver about 250 tons of thrust, so a total of just under 500 tons. Each solid rocket motor, of which up to 6 are used in total, brings also each about 210 tons of thrust. They don't build these aforementioned graphite epoxy Motor 63 extra-large solid rocket motors themselves, but purchase them from the friendly folks at Northrop Grumman. So it has at least 500 and a maximum of 1,757 tons of thrust. This undoubtedly makes it a versatile rocket with many possible uses. The new Merlin engines of the Falcon 9 deliver around 775, and the 27 of the Falcon Heavy a total of 2,268 tons of thrust. Tory Bruno, the chief executive officer of ULA, posted some graphics bordering on stupidity on tin and made himself a laughingstock for a few days. Don't get me wrong, I like him a lot, but such graphics where he falsely disparages SpaceX rockets in favor of his own rockets are simply embarrassing and damage his credibility. Such embarrassments usually bring people out of his position of weakness. You can find a link to the graphics in the description below, but I won't show such nonsense here. Considering that they are for sale, such graphics could lead to the craziest lawsuits and proceedings, especially in the United States of America. I do hope that potential buyers won't be fooled by such false representations. At the moment, 0% of the rocket is being reused. ULA has considered at some point in the future maybe jettisoning the before 4 engines to retrieve them with an inflatable heat shield and a parachute. They are confident enough to build additional production facilities, but they are not particularly efficient and will have a hard time increasing their cadence, because into the 2030s, they will operate both the 5 Vulcan and the Atlas V. But it's all a self-made problem. At the moment, they are launching their rockets from Space Launch Complex 41 in Cape Canaveral, Florida. In the future, they will probably also launch from Slick 3E in Vandenberg. Let's now move on to the exciting story of the first payload of the Vulcan, Peregrine. The moon lander served as a bus for more than 20 payloads and was supposed to land with them at the south pole of the moon. Among the payloads was also a small 2-kilo rover. However, problems arose soon after launch. Astrobotic, the company behind Peregrine, has reported on the highs and lows of their mission in an impressive series of updates. In update number 2, an anomaly in the propulsion system was identified as the likely cause of an unstable solar alignment. The team worked hard, improvised maneuvers were performed, and the solar panels were successfully aligned with the sun. But that was just the beginning of the challenges. It should be clearly stated here that it was their first attempt to land on the moon and that they are part of the Artemis program. As part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or Commercial Lunar Payload Services for short, they have secured 2 missions to the moon. Apart from that, they want to offer regular flights for smaller payloads to the moon in the future. In update number 4, it was announced that a critical loss of fuel, occurred due to the propulsion error. Nevertheless, the team focused on collecting valuable scientific data. Update number 6 informed us that due to the ongoing fuel loss, the onboard thrusters fired beyond their expected lifespan to keep the solar panels aligned with the sun. Nevertheless, in update number 10, Peregrine reached the impressive mark of 80% of the distance to the moon. The fuel lag slowed down and the team worked around the clock to extend the lifespan of the spacecraft. Even in update number 11, when the team confirmed that the Earth can be seen in a picture, Peregrine remained stable and fully charged. But in update number 16, the dynamics changed dramatically. The analysis showed that Peregrine is on a collision course with Earth, and the team had to make difficult decisions about the end of the mission. Nevertheless, it continued to do everything to collect data from the payloads. In a remarkable update number 17, Astrobotic finally announced the decision to let Peregrine enter the Earth's atmosphere to take responsibility for the space debris. Despite the propulsion failure, Peregrine worked stably for over 7 days and provided valuable insights. The final update number 18 confirmed the stability and the almost stopped fuel loss. Peregrine is approaching Earth and the mission is coming to an end. This unprecedented report of a rescue attempt and scientific success reflects the remarkable commitment and determination of the Astrobotics EYES team. They have another lander in the works known as Griffin. This is set to launch later this year, and I'm convinced they've learned a lot from the Peregrine mission. These ongoing updates have certainly made me a fan of Astrobotic. 2 ignitions of the Centaur upper stage were necessary to send the lander towards the moon. Once that was completed, it fired a 3rd time. This put it into a heliocentric orbit, that is, an orbit around the sun. Why? First, to demonstrate the capabilities of the Centaur upper stage, and second, to fulfill the Celestis Memorial Spaceflight Enterprise mission. For this, 234 small capsules were stowed in the upper stage, containing DNA samples, cremation ashes, and messages. These capsules will now orbit the sun forever and ever, along with the Centaur upper stage. If you want to know why Tori Bruno blocked me, then watch my video on Starliner, where I compare Boeing's capsule with SpaceX's Dragon. A big thank you goes out to all patrons and channel members who make Mars Chronicles possible. To support me in continuing this work, please consider becoming a channel member or patron. But you can also leave a super thanks or go shopping in the store. You can support Mars Chronicles further using the methods in the video description below. Liking and subscribing are free ways to help. And help enormously. Thank you very much. My name is Serwin, and this was Mars Chronicles. Thanks for tuning in. Bitch to the stars.